Hey, this is a podcast from Occupy Radio on Student Radio in Bergen. Please feel free to leave your feedback and comments on our Facebook page, Occupy Radio Norway.
This is Occupy Radio with Anthony and Mr. Pauling.
Hello world, and thank you for tuning in, streaming or downloading this show number 6.
It is.
Of Occupy Radio. I'm Mr. Pauling, and the voice you just heard now is my fellow occupant, Anthony Hill.
Hello all.
And of course we have Rune Storetvedt here from the Occupy movement. Hello Rune.
Hello.
And we are sitting in the studios of Student Radio here in Bergen, Norway. And Anthony.
Yep.
I believe you have a quote for us as usual.
I do. I'd like to start all the shows with a quote, and this is one of my favourites. Maybe many of the listeners have seen this quote you see these quotes on Facebook and here, there and everywhere on the internet, but it's quite apt for today's show about economics. And apparently it's by a Native American, and this is how it goes. Only when the last tree has been cut down, only when the last river has been poisoned, only when the last fish has been caught, only then will you find that money cannot be eaten. You like that one?
Yeah, I do like that. That's very nice. I've got another great quote by another great Native American.
Is it the usual Native American?
It's George W. Bush. We pride ourselves on our Bushisms here, and George came up with this pearl. The thing that's wrong with the French is that they don't have a word for entrepreneur. That might be entrepreneur there in Georgie.
That's got to be up in his top 10, I reckon.
Yes, it is. Well, there's top 10. I don't know.
But, Mr. Paulie, what can we bank on in today's show?
Aha, a nice little inference there, Anthony. Well, first I'll say what we have previously done on Occupy Radio, because we've spoken about different crises that are converging now to create one massive crisis, and how all these crises are interlinked. And last week we tucked into the subject of food and how there actually are enough resources on the planet to feed us all, given some intelligent management. Today's show will deal with something that we read, see and hear about every day in the news, and that is the economics crisis. And that, of course, you're on Student Radio. Student Radio is the station. Occupy Radio is the show. Anthony?
Yeah?
What's on now?
I don't know, you tell me.
I'll show you.
And now it's time for Who Would Have Thunk It?
Who would have thunk it? For those people out there who haven't heard our show yet, thunk is a word we made up.
Sorry, Anthony, but I was playing Word Feud the other day, and I wrote in thunk, and it came out.
Did it?
Yeah, so we didn't make that up. Yeah.
No, maybe somebody who makes that show heard us say it on the radio and have put it in.
It's made the dictionary already.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that we're making a difference out there.
Yeah, but anyway, Unthunkable Headlines is, just as it sounds in a way, headlines which you would never thought would be able to be thunk. Or read or happen in the world.
Or thunked.
Yes, but today actually I'm going to change the title. It's to Thunkable, Unthunkable News of the Week, because it's something that we've actually discussed and things we have discussed in previous shows and have been predicted in other quarters. The first headline is Rubber Bullets Used to Disperse Indignance in Spain. Spanish police have fired rubber bullets and baton-charged protesters attending a rally against austerity. Austerity is a word you're going to hear a bit in this show today too, Mr. Paulie. The clashes broke out as protesters tried to tear down barriers blocking access to the parliament in Madrid. Spanish media reported that at least 20 people had been arrested and more than a dozen injured. The Occupy Congress protest came as government prepares to unveil further austerity measures on Thursday. It's attempting to shrink its budget deficit, with the country in its second recession in 3 years and unemployment near 25%. Just as a byline, and this is the most unthunkable thing I find about this, tell me if you disagree, the current Minister for Economics in Spain, his name is Luis de Guindos, I think it looks like anyway. He was an advisor to Lehman Brothers Europe. And we all know what happened to Lehman Brothers, don't we? He went to Lehman Brothers. He was there until they went bankrupt. And then Simsalabim. He's the economics minister of Spain.
Reminds me a little bit of like a football manager who coaches a team and they get relegated, and then he takes another one, they get relegated.
Yeah. Anyway, that's that unthunkable. I've got another one, though. I've got a few today, Mr. Pauly. Huge rallies against austerity in Greece. Trade unions in Greece have begun the first general strike since the country's conservative-led coalition government came into power in June. Last Wednesday's 24-hour walkout is to protest at new planned spending cuts of more than 11.5 billion, that's with a B, euros. The savings are a precondition to Greece receiving its next piece of bailout funds. They need that, Mr. Pauly, so otherwise they'll go under. Large anti-austerity demonstrations are also planned. Greece needs the next 31 billion instalment of its international bailout, but with record unemployment and a third of Greeks pushed below the poverty line, there is strong resistance to further cuts.
And haven't they started doing strange things to get the money back?
Well, yeah, that was funny you should say that, because poor old Greece, they don't have the money, so they're being forced to do things like my next unthunkable headline. Next unthunkable headline is Greece rents out its islands to pay back foreign debt.
So they're prostituting their islands, basically.
Yes. So basically, Greece's Hellenic Republic Asset Development Fund has identified 40 uninhabited islands and islets that could be leased out for as long as 50 years to reduce debt as pressure grows on the country to revive an asset sales plan to receiving international aid. The fund is charged with raising 50 billion euros, that's with a B again, from state assets by the year 2020. So there we go. Have we got time for another one? One more quickie?
Chuck one in. Yeah.
This one, we're going away from Europe now. We're going over to South America. I'm going to bring Yaruna in on this one too, because there was something I didn't quite understand about it. Argentina given yellow card and facing a possible red card. It's funny that football analogy you made there before, Mr. Pauly, because this actually was a headline I read in the financial news.
Do you think that the IMF are using this so they can actually understand what's happening? The Argentinians, they go, okay, that's a red card, you get that if that happens?
Yeah, that actually is. That's what is.
They're actually doing
it. Yeah. Wow. International Monetary Fund head Christina Lagarde has warned Argentina it could face sanctions unless it produces reliable growth and inflation data. Ms. Lagarde gave Argentina until the 17th of December to address the problem. The IMF said the fund had given Argentina a yellow card, but it could face a red card. Private economists say that annual inflation in Argentina is 24%, much higher than the official Argentinian, what they're quoting in Argentina anyway. Please help me out here, Runa. If Argentina is facing such bad economic problems, how are sanctions going to help anything?
Well, in this particular case, I think the IMF is looking for control. They want access to the national audits, and they want the audits to be correct. And that is, of course, important. But they need to know how to apply their policies and advise other countries to interact with them. But if it turns out that they are cooking their books, it sort of says itself that you can't cooperate with a cheating player.
Right.
So hence the red card. And but if you get your books right, then maybe you can come back later. So
Christina's saying that they're not playing by the rules. They're cheating, and they've got a yellow card. They could get a red, and which means sanctions. But it didn't really answer the question about sanctions. How are they going to help?
No, it's kind of rude of me not to answer your question.
That's
but
okay.
The thing is that the
yellow
IMF...
card to you.
Okay, I'm guilty. The thing is that the IMF doesn't really have any other options than punish countries by imposing sanctions. So I think, yes, the sanctions aren't going to help Argentina either way.
We have an esteemed guest in the studio today, Mr. Pauly.
Isn't that nice? It keeps us well behaved, I think.
Yeah. I feel rather honoured to be sitting beside a professor we have here. He's an assistant professor of business administration and accounting law at Bergen University College. He's active in the Red Party of Norway. We'll mainly be speaking to him later in the show, but let me introduce him now, Mr. Torstein Dollar. Hello, Torstein.
Thank you. Hello. Nice to be here.
And if Torstein has any pertinent questions for us, we don't want him to hold back, do we, boys?
Torstein, the floor is yours.
Just butt in whenever you want to.
That's good.
But, Mr. Pauly, about the show itself, economics.
Tell me.
I wasn't real good at economics at school or college.
Or English.
Nah. I actually wasn't really interested in it, to tell the truth. I have trouble balancing my own economy at home. So, in one respect, I feel rather unqualified to even comment on the world's financial schmozzle. However, I have eyes and ears, like most people on the planet, and I see and hear what's going on in the world, and certain things just don't seem to make sense.
And what doesn't make sense, Anthony?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Mr. Pauly. Ever since I was basically able to listen to and understand the news, I can never remember a time period of more than 5 years or so when the economy didn't go in and out of recession. People losing their jobs and homes, ending up on the street, and politicians, their solution to the recession was always the same. More growth. Grow the economy. That means produce and consume more, right? And as I've said, I'm a financial dummy, right? But seeing as we live on a finite planet with finite resources, how can we expect to endlessly grow the economy? Do politicians know something we don't know? Is there another planet up there?
Well, they get paid for it, I guess.
Maybe Runa's going to explain this later. I really hope he does. But another thing that
maybe Torstein can explain.
Torstein as well. Actually, Torstein's maybe even more qualified than Runa. But another thing that actually got me worried was not so much worried, but wondering and worried was the huge financial crisis or crash of 2008, when hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, they lost their jobs and were thrown out of their homes and living in poverty in the USA and now even Europe. Why did they give billions to the banks so they wouldn't go under? But then there's Mr. and Mrs. Smith and,
all that are
losing everything.
Well, I don't quite understand it either, Anthony. But it's the government, and I'm sure they've had their reasons, and that they're working in our best interests.
Yes, well, I guess you must be right, and we may find out otherwise during the show, but I'm really looking forward to Runa and Vergaard's stories, and also Torstein's as well.
They're working on our best interest rates.
Anyway, when we first talked about this, I thought we were going to talk about the economic crisis of today that started back in 2008 with the credit crunch and recession, but for some reason Runa and the boys want to take it in a totally different direction.
Yeah, we talked a lot about the economy in the last year, and the biggest challenge has been actually understanding what's being played out and why.
So you mean there's a story behind the story?
Yeah, but it's not a conspiracy per se, like the Rothschilds or that Goldman Sachs are Jews or whatever. Sure, we can find bankers and politicians with ulterior motives, but what we choose to focus on today in the show is the structural framework that the economy is built on. So if you fall deep enough into the rabbit hole like we have done, then you realize that there are several economists who have been working on this and for years. Say, for instance, Ernst Friedrich Schumacher and Herman Daly and Manfred Max Neef. And they have been questioning the fundamentals of economy and society for years. And what they are saying is deeply disturbing regarding our understanding of our own predicaments and our willingness to change. On the other hand, they do give very credible explanations for the motives and mechanics that govern world economics today.
That sounds intriguing, but I always thought it's so confusing with all the experts giving contradictory stories on this. But if you could put all this into perspective, I think Anthony, myself, and the listeners would be very thankful, if you could.
Yeah, I'll try. This is an interpretation of ours. So if any of the listeners have comments or disagreements, please just put it a comment on our Facebook or send us email or whatever. Just let us know. So let me just start off with a very short history lesson that modern economics was conceived in a time period blessed with thinkers like Newton, Descartes, Smith, Darwin, and many others. And what was common for them was the idea that nature and society was built on certain mechanics that could be revealed by the use of rationality. So in essence, they forged this basis for the scientific method, but also introduced a new worldview where it was possible to master anything and everything if you just could isolate and identify the mechanisms of the world.
Oh, I can feel my eyes getting heavy here, Bruno, and I remember this kind of stuff lulling me to sleep in my economics class at school.
Yeah, well, I'm guessing some economists had the same problem. So anyways, it wasn't just rationality that happened in that time period. In just about 200 or 300 years of overlapping time, there was a big push to more nationalized forms of ownership away from the aristocratic and church-owned property over to the state-owned and controlled property. So the general term for this doctrine is mercantilism.
And what has this got to do with today's system then?
Well, today's free market ideology is built on the reaction to mercantilism. Especially Adam Smith's works has been quoted in this regard, and he coined this term, the invisible hand of the market. And with this, he sort of meant that under free conditions, the market would find an equilibrium or a balance, whereas supply and demand always match up in the most effective way.
I think I heard Ronald Reagan talking about that kind of thing as well.
Yeah.
Maybe. So the principle, it's kind of the same principle that makes eBay and Craigslist and Finn work, yeah?
Yeah, in a very simplistic form, it does work quite well. What doesn't work well is when you add today's monetary system and real-life complexity to it.
Rune, as a skeptic of the market system, how do you feel when you have to go to IKEA?
Well, I don't like IKEA. It's too big. I have to walk a lot.
IKEA, I guess, is what it's called internationally as well.
I feel the same as Bruno. I hate going to IKEA. Yeah. It's too big and too crowded. And I feel every time I go there, I buy something.
Yeah. But do you feel like a kid in a candy store at all? Or?
No, I don't anymore. I felt that before, but once I've understood that there are some market mechanics and what's driving it, then I can't really enjoy myself in any stores anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yes, anyway, when we were talking about money not behaving properly, I remember we compared it to a tool like shaped like a hammer, and I reckon you've got a lot to say about this in that regard. So why don't we just start with money?
Yeah, if we remember back to show number 2, the convergence of crises, we said that money behaves in the same way all over the planet, irrespective of currency form, if it's yen or dollars or whatever. So I think the most basic attribute of this kind of money form is that it's scarce. So without scarcity, it won't hold any value.
Yes, I remember the days when my parents told me that money doesn't grow on trees, and I had to find my own money to buy my new surfboard.
I think they're sort of wrong in that respect. It's even worse, because actually money is an abstract idea shared by us humans. So the simple explanation is that money is conjured out of thin air. Anyways, the second attribute of money is that it can and should be accumulated. So without accumulation, you won't have investment, and without investment, you won't have entrepreneurship.
The word that George Bush thinks that the French don't have.
Exactly, they don't have that in France. The third and most problematic attribute is that new money is currently created through the issuance of debt or credit.
We were chatting with Torstein Dollar, and you had an anecdote which amused us no end about a conference you were once at.
Yes, it was a conference arranged by an organization. I think the organization was founded by the Oslo Stock Exchange, so-called idealistic organization, which should promote saving in the stock market, convince people that saving in the stock market is very wise. And I was invited to the discussion in order to create some temperature in the discussion. I think it's so it shouldn't be so dull. And then I told them that when you to have an exponential growth, which we say the economy grows with 1% or 2% or 4% a year. Well, it develops after some years into outer space. And of course, when we're living in a globe, the Earth, with limited resources, it cannot succeed. It will be an immense crisis. And it's threatening the whole human society. And then we had chief executive officer of the biggest Norwegian life insurance company of Norway there. And he said that, I think Torstein Dollar is right. Of course he's right. But we cannot think that way. We have to try to get the funds of our customers to grow as fast as possible. That's what we have to do. And there you have it.
Yeah, and he's right in what he says
right.
as well. Yeah,
he was right,
Yes.
and it is very important to see, just as Rune said, that it's the framework people are working within. Also the top executives of companies, they're working with the framework that press them to do things like this.
Yes, and we are going to be talking a little bit more about that later on. But Rune, you were talking about money and creating new money. But what's wrong with creating new money? Then there's more to go around for everybody. Many of the things we use and enjoy today would not be possible without loans. Doesn't a loan contribute to the economy?
Well, if just viewed simply, it does. But when you repay, you also pay an interest, and by that I mean the most common form, which is compound interest, which means that you add interest to the interest plus the principal. And that means that the amount that you have to work into existence is a lot more than you originally borrowed. And the reason for having any interest at all is to motivate that use of accumulated capital, so it doesn't only be used for business. So giving you, Anthony, money to buy a house, it doesn't really compare with giving someone else money to set up a gold mine, unless there's an interest there to even out the payback over time.
And when you put it like that, it does actually make sense. But we know there must be a catch.
Yeah, very much so, and there are several parts of this catch. And the first part is the need for constant debt creation to make money flow into the system. And if we remember back to 2008, then nobody trusted each other because there was so much bad credit issued, which meant that you didn't know if anyone could really pay back on their loans. And in the summer of 2009, it was estimated that the world's governments had put roughly $10 trillion on the table to get... Yeah, $10 trillion.
That's 1,000 billion.
Yeah, to get the financial sector to start lending again. So if they hadn't done that, then most of the banks on Earth could have risked going bankrupt and society would have ground to a halt because money stopped flowing.
So basically the government threw loads of money at the banks to kickstart the economy, or using another motorcycle analogy, maybe to rev up the economy. And this sounds like what I was talking to Paulie about in the beginning of the show, this one solution that politicians seem to have been using for decades to grow us out of a crisis.
Yeah, and the second part of this catch is that you have a need for perpetual growth. And once you start compounding the interest, you have to do more than just build the house or set up the gold mine. You have to make more. And a system of perfect balance or equilibrium, as Adam Smith talks about, it's just not possible in such a system. Well, Anthony, I thought your intro to this show was good, because you mentioned that politicians regularly use this word growth, and as we've also talked about, that this is in spite of the urgent need to stop the destruction of the earth, and we've talked about that in the other previous shows.
Yes, well, it's all interlinked. And to be honest, growth is the only word they use, and just after that they usually slash some kind of social budget, like a school budget or a health budget or something like that.
Yeah, and that brings me to the third and the final part of the catch, and it's called dependency. So do you remember the phrase too big to fail?
I sure do, actually. Yeah, that was about the banks. And remember Lehman Brothers? They weren't too big because they ended up going bankrupt. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of talk about that kind of thing back then, wasn't there?
Yeah. After Lehman Brothers fell, there was a huge concern that banks would start to fall in a domino pattern. And one of the crucial pieces lined up was AIG, which isn't even a bank. It's an insurance company. But it had to be saved to avert the unraveling of the financial industry. And even though it was apparent that they had taken a risk which far exceeded their standings. And what we learned from that debacle was that banks had created an interdependency built on debt, and that this interdependency wasn't just to each other, but also with the rest of society. So we don't have time to go into the specifics to explain the interdependency, but the short explanation is that debt is created with leverage, which means that you don't need to actually have all the money you lend to someone, which means that the base assets or capital, if you will, needs to be secure, and that loans don't default too often or you risk going bankrupt. We'll explain that later. Because there is an interdependency, no assets can be absolutely secure. So if we take Greece as an example, they should default, but they're not allowed to do so. And the simple reason is that state obligations are considered secure placement, or they used to be at least. And if Greece is allowed to default, then an unknown number of banks will lose some of their assets. And even worse, other nations in deep debt could consider defaulting as well, and it will completely unravel the financial industry.
Boys, and our regular listeners may have noticed the absence of one of our regular guests. Where is he?
Well,
Vegard, where are you? Vegard Bilsbach. Well, the bad news is that he's moved from Bergen to the city of Trondheim. We've lost another one to Trondheim. The good news is that he's still going to be a regular panelist on our show.
Yeah.
And we'll bring him in via telephone.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
How's we're fine. How's Trondheim treating you?
Yeah, it's good actually.
Yeah.
Starting to settle in.
Now, Vegard, you know that we have a new segment, and it revolves around you and your trumpet.
Yeah.
So listen to this. We've got a little jingle. Well, now you can get on your trumpet. You've got something for us and our listeners today, haven't you?
Yeah, I've had something stuck in my trumpet for the last couple of days that I want to get out. It's about property, money, and the commons. And by the commons, I mean what we humans share and are equally entitled to. Back before agriculture, when we were hunter-gatherers, property as a concept didn't exist to us. This mentality could still be found among natives in North America when Europeans got there. They didn't understand how man could own land. In fact, some of them even claimed that it was the land that owned us. Europeans, of course, knew better, and if the Native Americans didn't want to own the land, they certainly did. Up through history, more and more land has been claimed by someone as their property. Today it's hard to find a spot that isn't owned. But what did they in fact do, the first ones who put up fences and said, "This is mine"? The way I've come to see it, they stole the property from us all, from the commons. In the words of one of the guys involved in the early days of the United States, Thomas Paine, man did not make the earth, and though he had a natural right to occupy it, he had no right to locate as his property in perpetuity any part of it. Neither did the creator of the earth open a land office from whence the first title deeds should issue. Since property arose, it has been used to create a lasting and increasing advantage for the owners. Those who had no land had to rent it and pay with their labor or some of their crops or both. Today, money serves the same role. Those who have it can live off of lending it to those who don't, while they in turn have to work to pay it back, often for as long as they live and often unsuccessfully because of the compound interest. Debt is even inherited in some cases. In this way, the original thieves and their biological and societal descendants, or what we call the 1%, keep their advantage over the victims of this theft, the 99%, or maybe even the 99.9%. But the biggest thief of all is our money-based economic system for what really happens when the economy grows. What we call the real economy is made up of all goods and services that people pay for. But these goods and services, or at least the needs they meet, were previously available for free. How many people paid for someone to take care of their children 200 years ago? The growth of the economy represents more and more needs being met from the economy taking something from us and selling it back. And what effect does this have on the natural world around us? Seen through the eyes of the economy, a tree standing in a forest has no value. It first has to be chopped down and made into lumber. Water from a natural spring has no value, but put it in a plastic bottle and that quickly changes, especially if the clean natural springs are becoming more and more rare. And what about community? Connecting with a human being in pain has no value, but send him or her to a psychiatrist that can prescribe some pills, and the gears of the economic machine turns a little faster. I'm going to leave it at that and finish with a quote from the book that inspired my rant, Sacred Economics, written by one of the prominent thinkers associated with the Occupy movement, Charles Eisenstein. Money is the corpse of the commons, the embodiment of all that was once common and free, turned now into property of the purest form.
Vegard.
Yeah.
He didn't hold back there either, did he?
He certainly did not.
No, I didn't.
Good on you, mate. Well, that's Vegard's first trumpet blow, and it's certainly not going to be his last as well. So anyway, Vegard, we're going to say goodbye now, and we'll be looking forward to hearing from you again next week.
Yeah, bye. Enjoy the rest of the show.
See you, mate.
Thanks, mate.
Bye.
So before we went to Vegard and his trumpet, we were speaking about, or Rune was actually speaking about Greece and the crisis in Greece at the moment and how countries can't fail. And Greece is going to be in big trouble either way, as I understand it. To be honest, I'm not sure I'm getting the parts, though, where you talked about leverage and assets. Perhaps you could put it a little bit more simply, Rune, there for our listeners, and what is really normal banking practice.
Yeah, sure. The basic concept of modern banking goes back to Italy in the 14th century, but it's not until the banks of the goldsmiths in the 18th century England, you see the start of fractional reserve banking.
Yeah, I've heard about that one quite a lot in the last year, fractional reserve. What does that mean?
Well, basically it means lending out money you don't have.
Well, I could start off a bank then, couldn't I?
Why don't we? Why don't we get into banking, Mr. Paulie? Bugger this radio.
Well, someone beat you to it, to be honest. The concept is that you have a certain amount of gold inside your vault, and you write a note which says the holder of this note is good for X amount of gold, which is yours. Then you give someone that note and say you want an interest on him holding that note. So given that you don't miscalculate, you can issue more notes than you have gold, because there is a time lag on withdrawal of the gold and an inflow of gold from the interest. So nowadays that's standard banking practice, but instead of gold we call it equities, and the paper notes it's called assets.
I'm finding this somewhat interesting now, Rune. In
so
fact, far
you're
more
still
interesting.
Awake.
Yeah, this is better than economics class at school, and Rune is actually quite an interesting person to listen to. And I've learnt more today than sleeping through 2 years of economics at school. But let me see if I got this right. The equity is the equivalent to the gold in the vaults, and the assets would be equivalent to the notes. All right. So leverage is the difference between the two.
Yes, very good, Anthony.
Right.
I deserve a clap there, don't I?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Leverage is indeed that, and its numbers are represented by a ratio of something to one. To put it very crudely, the one is the gold, and something is the number of times you have lent out the gold. So if we look at banking today, we see that the proportion of leverage is utterly frightening. Just in comparison, Lehman Brothers was calculated at 31 to 1 when it fell. Now, in the summer of 2011, German banks are calculated at 32 to 1. The Belgian banks at 30 to 1. And the average for the whole euro area is 26 to 1, while the Americans actually looks good at 13 to 1.
So there's a whole lot of invisible money out there. We were talking about the big problems in Greece at the moment. How did they get into that mess anyway, Runa?
Conventional wisdom says that you learn from your mistakes, but we've also heard that history repeats itself. And today's situation is very comparable to the Great Depression of the 1920s, which also started with the financial sector unable to cope with its own speculation. And what we did learn was that you can't tighten the money flow by allowing bankruptcies and put the inflation up. Instead, we've embraced the concept that by issuing more loans and encouraging spending, we can outgrow our problems. So the problem is, of course, that the global economy turns into a game of musical chairs, where some nations are forced to pay the bills of the financial party by strangling their own people. And I think the fancy name for this is austerity.
Yeah. It's people complain about cuts in public services and pensions and wages, but the politicians just use their snake talk about, using words like austerity and adjustment of fiscal policy. I hear that a lot.
Yeah. After the Great Depression, we also learned that mixing commercial and investment banking would create interdependencies, which could be bad. And to avoid this, some laws were, like the Glass-Steagall Act in the America, were put in place. And this was to ensure that any consequences of major bankruptcies could be contained within its own sector. But following 2 decades of neoliberalistic rule, which started with Reagan and Thatcher, this wisdom was suddenly lost to us. And just on a whim here, do you remember the movie character Gordon Gekko?
We certainly do.
Not only do we remember him, but Runa, we've prepared something.
Oh, yes.
Yes, because Gordon Gekko, he was the character played by Michael Douglas in the movie Wall Street, and he had a famous speech or tirade, was it, Mr. Pauly? And we've got a little clip of that tirade, don't we?
We do.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. Greed in all of its forms. Greed for life, for money, for love, knowledge, has marked the upward surge of mankind, and greed, you mark my words, will not only save Teldar Paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and everybody who's seen that film will remember, of course, Gordon Gekko. But didn't Oliver Stone intend for that to be a sarcastic moment on the financial industry?
Yeah, very much so. But the sarcasm was, I think, lost on a whole generation of young financial talents that wanted to be like him. And I think this speech, particularly this speech, it stuck in their minds. Because in the world of cynical finance, it is indeed very true. However sad it sounds in the ears of normal people like us. So I think many people would agree that in the 80s we saw a cultural change where taking shortcuts to success became fashionable.
Yeah, but a common response I hear is, what's wrong with being rich, and I can't really blame them, Can you help me out with this one there, and what should I say to them?
Well, I hear that a lot as well, and in a short answer, I think we can use the in a family of 7 analogy that we made in a previous show when we talked about food. and that is, it is highly unethical for one person in a family of 7 to have everything, while the rest is simply or barely scraping by. And being wealthy today, today's economy is unethical because the wealth is indirectly gained from the misery of others. But people usually, they don't want to see that connection or take the consequences of it.
Yeah, and quite often it's just so far away that you don't see it, or maybe you just might see a short clip of it on the news. But I think we've strayed a little bit off topic. We were talking about lessons from the Great Depression and what kinds of concepts that led us into today's economic crisis.
Yes, indeed we were. So seeing this cultural shift in the 80s, it also saw some new developments in the world of finance. The deregulation and tax cuts to the rich put in motion by the neoliberalistic regimes of Reagan and Thatcher did wonders for capital accumulators, and with it also the need for financial services. And if we couple this deregulation and tax cuts with expanding technologies like computers and robotics, and you have business going through the roof. And the world of finance turned in the late 80s, early 90s from being a business of service to become an industry in itself, creating and transforming wealth by the help of advanced machinery and creative products.
Rune, excuse me, I've heard that the image of stock exchange floors being littered with paper and screaming traders is not exactly what it used to be now.
No, the truth is they're being replaced by trading robots, which are just computer programs buying and selling according to certain parameters. Yeah, I don't think they even say that. It's just the zeros and ones.
Do they all drive BMWs as well?
Well, that's the good thing about them. They don't require you to
No, they don't have to be fed or anything.
Yeah.
Either. Yeah.
And they have a word for it. It's called black box trading, and it's widely criticized for exacerbating ups and downs because they don't program the computers to make consequential considerations.
What do you mean by that?
Well, back in May 2010, the Dow Jones index, it fell nearly 700 points in a matter of minutes. Which is quite remarkable since Dow Jones usually uses a day to bob up and down within a 100-point range or so. And what was said to cause the so-called Mayday flash crash was a company who had instructed their computer to sell shares in order to have liquidity just in case of a Greek default. And with them being a substantial player, their robots' actions, it turned on other players' robotic algorithms who were also instructed to sell. So they all just started selling.
It's like Matrix meets the finance industry or Wall Street, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's a very good image for it because there is a severe disconnect between the financial economy and the real economy. And the formula for the systemic crisis we have today starts with the ability to leverage, which makes room for more depth, that you fill it with housing deregulation and you mix it with a fusion of commercial and investment banking, and then you just bake the new money into unevenly sized packages that you call derivatives, and then you watch the economy grow in the world market oven.
Yummy economy.
I'm getting hungry.
Yeah, yeah. But the actual disconnect, it happens when we can just say it's very coarsely that the disconnect happens when the financial economy outgrows the world it was meant to represent. And just to give you a number on that, the size of the derivatives market is now estimated at $1,200 trillion, which is roughly 20 times the size of the GDP of the world.
Okay, stop here. I think you're going to have to explain derivatives if they're that expensive.
Yeah, because derivatives, it's just one of those many financial terms that I don't understand. Not only that, I don't think anyone does. In fact, I remember that Michael Moore film where he went and asked people in the financial industry to explain things like derivatives, and they didn't know either. But anyway, that's a whole other story in itself, you know.
Yeah, but the thing is that derivatives is a lot of different things. But I think it's very good that you ask me this, because then I can also explain risk management.
Oh, there's
as well.
another one.
And okay, very quickly, explaining derivatives is that it's a note that derives its value from real assets, and that could be assets could be stocks, commodities like gold, corn, computers. And derivatives comes in many forms and behaviors. You have drawing rights, you have futures, or things called credit default obligations or credit default swaps, and many, many more. But the main objectives of these is to diversify and modulate the possibilities for financial transactions, which is just another way of saying risk management.
Yeah, exactly what I was kind of saying before, explaining a word with another word that needs its own explanation.
I can see you're trying to simplify as much as you can.
Yeah,
he's doing a good job there, Rena.
Thank you, but I'm trying to simplify this as much as I can. And remember back to what we said about capital accumulation, that any person that's saving their money should be looking for a way to make their money work for them. Of course, you can leave it on a bank account and let it slowly degrade by inflation. But the so-called smart thing to do is to put it to use or invest it. For financial players, this could be speculated into stocks. But we know that the stock markets fluctuate, and some stocks even get wiped out when their companies go bankrupt. And the same goes for all other activities. But if you spread that risk to several investments and you make a paper for it, you've basically created a type of derivative.
Yeah, so one goes down, another one goes up, but it all evens out in the end.
Yeah, and the general idea is not just that it evens out, but with a certain amount of effort, it will pay back more than having it in the bank. And the idea is now so widespread and the amounts of derivatives so high that risk management becomes meaningless, because we have created so much interdependency that any defaults or bankruptcies of a certain size creates ripple effects which have unknown consequences.
You would think that the economists and financial advisors and politicians would have thought of that, perhaps?
Yeah, and then we have to go back earlier to what we said about growth, which is the ultimate engine for this. And having the financial industry expanding their business to include financial products like derivatives did indeed add to growth. And it also added the dimension of risk-managed growth. So it would be easier for entrepreneurs to get capital for the new projects. And some economists also believe that this development had eliminated the possibility of a global crisis, which we see now. And in retrospect, there's been some sharp criticism of how ideas concerning our own rationality fall short on critical thinking, both in politics and economics.
Yes. So back to the IMF, yeah? What kind of role have the IMF played in this anyway, Rena? Weren't they supposed to be working on or with the World Bank to avoid these kinds of scenarios where nations go under?
I remember you mentioned Peter Doyle, who used to be a senior advisor in the IMF.
Yeah.
And he criticized it for not issuing proper warnings and not taking the right steps to alleviate the situation. Of course, we can speculate about this, but I think we need to recap the origins of both these institutions.
You mean the end of World War II and the Bretton Woods Agreement that we mentioned back way back in show one?
Very good, Anthony. First and foremost...
Anthony's been listening to the podcasts again.
Okay, very good. First and foremost, the IMF and the World Bank were put in place to rebuild ruined countries in Europe and Japan and other countries. And in that very process, they did so by extending the reach of Anglo-American business interest. And at the time, it was a good agreement. Money flowed into the ravaged countries in the form of loans, which they used to buy goods and services from America and England. Eventually, this rebuilding came to a point of saturation where it would be more interesting to find new partners. But the only problem being that these countries were already engaged in resource exports. And another way to describe that, it's a transition from colonialism to modern capitalistic resource exploitation.
And at the beginning of the show, ladies and gentlemen, we introduced Torstein Dollar, who is an assistant professor of business administration and accounting law at Bergen University College, and very active in the Red Party. Runa, you have a question for Torstein, don't you?
Yeah, I was just going to ask him to expand on what we're talking about, which was the rebuilding of Europe and what happened after these institutions like the World Bank and IMF, after they had sort of done their first part of the mission. What happened after that with the world trade?
We'll let Torstein run with that.
Well, there was a development towards so-called free trade liberalization, and in Europe they created what later has developed into the European Union. Started with some agreement on coal and steel.
That was in the 40s, wasn't it?
Yes, I think perhaps
49, I think.
or something like that, and the Rome Agreement, I think was
that's right,
the 50s or something like that. I'm not. I don't have everything of that in my head, but it has been very important to open up several countries for trade. In my opinion, dominated by big companies, by what developed into multinationals. And in Norway, it has been a lot of people have engaged in politics and popular movements against this free trade development, because production in Norway very important for developing advanced industrial production in Norway has been to make protection against big international companies and their interest in compete with Norwegian companies. And when a country is in a situation with low industrial level, they have to defend themselves against the international competition in order to build and develop a national production, which has been very important in Norwegian history. And what we experienced during the 50s and 60s was that this protection was torn down, and the Norwegian industry, such as we experienced it here in Norway, was exposed more and more to international competition, and a lot of production plants were closed down. And there is, for instance, maybe one shoe factory or something like that left in Norway now. A specialization developed. So and that's in international economic theory, dominating theory. It says that's very good. You have to specialize on what you are really good in and try to make the best of that. And what we experienced in Norway was that a lot of plants closed down, and we had specialization. And that's there isn't actually very much industrial production left in Norway at present. And I think that a lot of countries in the world, developing countries, they need this protection that the Norwegian production manufacturing industry had during the last part of the 19th century and the first part of the 20th century. The World Trade Organization and more intensely the European Union, they are tearing down this protection, and I think it's quite bad.
So what you're actually saying is that this is what the attack movement or other people have called for globalization.
That's right. Well, it develops into quite stupid things like Norwegian. We have a lot of very good fisheries outside the Norwegian coast, and we export fish, and now we export fish to China, and the Chinese workers, they make fish pins. Is that what's it called in
Oh,
English?
fish fingers, yeah.
Yes, fish fingers.
You used to call them fiskepinner.
Yeah, fiskepinner.
Yeah. Fish fingers in
English.
English.
Fish fingers, yes. And other more advanced dishes, and they export it back to Norway, and we eat it here.
Yeah.
And I think it's that's really stupid. It's it's saying something that this cannot be the right way to do things.
The same as that thing with the apples in California being sent to China to be polished and then sent back to California again.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the bad way of trading. And in my opinion, this bad way of national trade has developed and plays a greater and greater part in the international economy.
Okay. About what we're seeing at the moment, is that a depression or a recession? We're talking, I'm a dummy here, economic dummy. So is it a depression or a recession, and what's the difference?
Well, recession is when the definition is when the gross domestic product decreases for 2 quarters in a row. Depression is deeper and more lasting crisis. So at present there is obviously a recession in Greece and Spain, Portugal. I'm not quite sure. I don't think it is. It is not a recession at present, but in my opinion, it's quite obvious that also the U.S. economy is going into a recession in not a very long time.
So, Torstein, why hasn't Norway experienced the current economic turmoils in the same way?
Well, the oil and gas industry is crucial here, but not in the way that most people think. It is not because of the revenues from oil and gas production. The Norwegian government, they have immense income tax, mostly, from the oil and gas industry, but most of it is invested in financial markets abroad and not used in the Norwegian economy. Most of it. What is the crucial point here is the immense investment activity. Yeah. It is the investment activity in the oil and gas industry which is really important here. I guess,
sorry, the cliche here is that when the oil runs out, we're not going to be the same. Does that apply really, given that there's so much investment going on in foreign companies?
Yes, what creates activity in the Norwegian economy is not investment in companies abroad, but it's investment in new development of oil fields and gas fields. And that creates industrial opportunities for a lot of Norwegian companies here in Bergen, in the western part of Norway and the northern part of Norway. A lot of building companies, several equipment for the oil and gas industry is developing and creating economic possibilities for other Norwegian companies as well. So that is the main reason why Norway is not hit by the economic crisis so far. There is mostly, for most people, quite easy to get a job because of this immense, really extremely high level of investment in which is productive investment, but it is in oil and gas extraction
only and related industries, and it has the flow-on effect. Yeah.
So and that's what creates relatively good times in Norway. Financial investments abroad with income from oil and gas extraction is they do not give jobs in Norway. Well, some jobs, but not many.
No.
So they are actually not that important. And the government, they have this so-called foreign pension fund, which we usually call the oil fund of Norway, and it owns at present a bit more than 1% of all the shares in the world, and of course it's involved in the international financial markets, international financial speculation, and it's the intention is of course that it shall give some interest income, financial income to Norway. It has gone up and down, but by and large, it has given some income, and it has, but it has not in itself given very much economic activity in Norway. So the common opinion is that it is the oil income, but that's not true. It is the investment in oil development that is important here.
I have a question about which goes along the same lines as the question that Anthony asked me about when he talks to his friends. He says, what's wrong with making money? And why should the Norwegians actually care about this, about
being rich?
Yeah, about the economic crisis happening around the world. Shouldn't we just be happy and go along with whatever is going on inside our country?
Because we have enough to eat and everything.
Yeah, we have enough.
Well, first of all, I think when people in Greece and Spain and Portugal have great problems and bad lives, I think we should care about it. So it has something to do with international solidarity. But even if we look at it from a Norwegian point of view, strictly Norwegian point of view, it is not wise to be so dependent on on oil and gas. And if the oil price is reduced very much, which may happen if the international economy goes into a depression.
So you're just saying that it's just a matter of time before the Norwegian people are also going to feel some effects?
Yes, I think so. Well, first of all, we are very dependent on the oil markets. We are also, of course, well, if you're looking 10, 20, 30 years ahead, the oil will not last anymore. We have taken what's there. And
actually, we discussed that in a previous show where we speculated about the possibility of oil actually not running out, that the Norwegian oil may run out, but you have tar sands and oil shales.
Yes, and of course, for instance, Statoil, the Norwegian state-dominated oil company, they invest in that kind of
dirty oil.
Yes, abroad. But I don't think it's a future for Norwegian workforce in that. There are some companies that have developed a very high-tech production, which has an international market, and it's not that dependent on the oil production and market here in Norway. But nevertheless, it is involved in the same international market, and if the oil price goes down, then it goes down internationally. And I think that will bring the economic crisis into Norway. But then also attack on the welfare state is spreading from Greece, from Italy, well, they have some kind of welfare state there too, and from Spain and from the European Union to Norway.
Oh, yes.
Even if it's not necessary, you can say, for the Norwegian government and to attack the welfare state. But nevertheless, it's you can hardly think of a very highly developed Norwegian welfare state as an island in an international ocean of problems and crisis. So it will spread to the Norwegian economy that way too.
Yeah.
You said before about the oil running out and bad things because happening because Norway have all their eggs in one basket, so to speak. But isn't that what the oil fund was meant to do, like to prop up the economy after the oil runs out? That's what I thought it was for anyway. But
well, the rules that the oil fund is ruled by, it says that we shall never use the oil fund. It's only the interest income that shall be used.
It's like keeping it under the blanket or under the mattress.
Exactly. It shall be there forever for future generations. And, well, I don't believe in that. So, I mean, if it's invested in the international financial markets, it will... they may run into heavy losses, for instance. But in my opinion, what is really serious... it's not what I talked about now.
Yeah.
It's that Norway is really making the international resource crisis and the climate crisis more severe.
Yeah.
And that is the real big argument against this.
It is. It's exactly what we spoke about in our energy show, that dependence on fossil fuels is creating even more problems than...
Yes. I think that in 50 years, our children and grandchildren, they will say, what the hell how did you think?
Yeah.
How could you destroy these resources? It's taken 150 million years to create those resources, and you destroyed them just to burn them up and make the climate worse.
Thank you very much, Torstein. We're running out of time now, and I would have loved to have sat here and spoken to you and discussed for another hour or even longer, but maybe we'll get you into the studio again sometime in the future. Yes, and that was a very interesting discussion there with Torstein. Runa, what can we do to break this chain of dependency on money, debt and financial trickery?
Yeah, we talked about this in show number 2, and very quickly we said that money behaves in the same way in almost any country in the world. A lot of people talk about how central banks are a bad thing, and I'm inclined to agree with that, but the criticism misses the larger picture, because the central banks are just gatekeepers to the monopoly of this one type of money, which has certain properties. And those properties are scarce. The money is scarce. It's cumulative and debt and interest-based. So if we consider those properties, we can compare money to a tool we expect to be applicable in all tasks around the house. And have you ever tried changing a light bulb with a hammer?
No, and I wouldn't try.
Well, the good thing is that there are already several alternative money systems available to us. And I'll tell you about 2 examples which I have taken from the book New Money for a New World, written by economy professor Bernard Lietard and founder of Quitera Press, Stephen Belgian. And we go to Japan, which is at the forefront of this development of alternative currencies. And they have more than 260 different types of systems tested nationwide. And this is more than the rest of the world combined. One of these is called the Furai Kippu. I don't know about the pronunciation. But
sounded pretty good to me.
Yeah, I'm just testing it out. The translation of this is something like a caring relationship ticket. And the Furai Kippu is basically a social currency that can only be used to pay for care receiving. And with approximately 1.8 million elderly and handicapped needing care every day, you can imagine the needs for helping hands, or even the size of conventional money that would go into social services if the simple tasks like grocery shopping or walking the dog would all end up on the fiscal budget. So people getting paid in this currency can either pass it on or save it for their own retirement or use. And the beauty of this is that it actually creates a sort of care network without the need for fiscal stimulus. And the quality of caregiving is also reported to be much improved, that people have actually started to perceive the elders as their surrogate parents who are either deceased or living away.
Yeah.
So the second example isn't actually in use. It's being discussed in Brazil. They're seriously considering putting into use, but they haven't actually figured out all the details. But it's called a Zabair or something like that. It's a Portuguese word for knowledge. And it's distributed among the youngest students in primary school. And they use it to buy assistance from older students. And this creates a chain of one-to-one tutoring where the Zabair ultimately ends up paying all or parts of the fee for university tuition. And the beauty of this currency is that we have research showing that the learning value of teaching others other something is one of the most effective ways of actually learning the subject yourself. So they're getting paid, but also learning the stuff. And the difference between these two currencies is that the Brazilian one is convertible into the national currency, but it can only be redeemed by the top educational institutions. So you have the money just flowing upwards, and then the institutions can redeem it. To protect from eventual inflation, the number of this money is limited by the number of seats in the top institutions, so you can never have more sabers out than you expect people to go up to the highest levels, and it's further limited by a 20% expiry fee, which kicks in every semester.
Yeah. Mate, that's very interesting and impeccable research there too, Runa.
It's good to know that there's hope. There's bodies out there who care enough to implement and
think differently.
Give good proactive ideas to change the system somehow.
Yeah. We are nearing the end of the show, and so to do a little summary here, the main point being made today is that when it comes to the economy and money, we need to open our minds, really. Money can take different forms and be created and used in different ways for the benefit of everybody and everything on the planet. So I guess world leaders they've been throwing the same old solution at our roller coaster economy seemingly forever, and it's obvious that it's not working. And Mr. Pauly, one thing we can definitely not accumulate anyway.
What's that?
It's time. And we're nearly out of time.
We are.
So I reckon it's time for Science and Tech Breakthrough of the Week. Eek, eek, eek. And the science breakthrough this week is a little connected to our show, because the show is about money and economics, and this is about cash for trash, Mr. Pauly.
Cash for trash.
The Eco ATM machine.
Okay.
Eco ATM machine, like in Norway they call them a mini bank, you know.
Yeah, so you go to a tree.
No. Listen and I'll tell you.
Okay.
Have you heard of the saying, one man's garbage is another man's gold, Mr. Pauly?
I have heard of that, Anthony.
Well, in an age where technology is changing at an unprecedented rate, that old saying is truer than ever, and looking to give consumers an easy way to recycle their unwanted mobile phones and MP3 players while also providing a cash incentive, the Eco ATM has developed an automatic kiosk that can differentiate between various devices and provide monetary compensation on the spot. It all began as a wooden box-type prototype that required a person to be there on hand and ensure fair trades. But now the Eco ATM can identify individual electronic devices from a database containing images of more than 4,000 devices with a 97.5 accuracy rate.
Wow.
And not only that, the system learns from any mistakes that it's made before, and it grades the condition of the device to help it determine its market value.
So my old Motorola mobile phone from 1994, which is almost as big as a suitcase.
Mate, you chuck it in there and you get some cash out.
Cool. Wow.
Yeah.
How about that? I've got about 7 old mobile phones lying around.
Well, there you go, mate. They should be in every shopping centre, and there maybe will be one day, I hope.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah. But that's pretty much all for the show today. It's been a pleasure as usual, Mr. Pauly.
Been an absolute delight to be here.
It has.
And, of course, it's been a delight to have...
Runa has outdone himself today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Runa's out-runed himself.
Yeah. And thanks, Aids. Fantastic editing you will be hearing if you listen to this podcast later on. It's all to you, to the first aid sitting over there.
And, of course, we had Vegard from Trondheim.
Yep. Thanks, Veg.
And Torstein Dollar, of course, as mentioned.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.